If you knew why you're drawn to the person you're in a relationship with, you're on your way to getting the love you want. This is Robert Manni, host of Guys TV, and this week my special guest is relationship expert and icon, Harville Hendrix. And it all starts right here, right now on Guys TV. You can also catch me on KCAA Radio here in Southern California, Guys Radio, my worldwide podcast, and we're on UK Health Radio all weekend long. Guys TV, Guys Radio, thanks for your support. Okay, Guys Radio, it is the interview portion of our show. I'm delighted to welcome a new guest, an iconic relationship expert, one of the world's most foremost. His name is Harville Hendrix. He's written a book called Getting the Love You Want, A Guide for Couples. It's one of the most famous books about relationships that's ever been written. Harville, he's got a PhD. He began his career as a therapist and educator at the Pastoral Counseling Center of Greater Chicago. He met his wife, Helen LaKelly Hunt, and they married in 1982, and they co-created what's known as Imago Relationship Therapy, a couples therapy, and they co-authored 3 New York Times best-selling books, Getting the Love You Want, which I just mentioned right here. 4 million copies of that have been sold. Keeping the Love You Find and Giving the Love That Heals. Receiving Love, Making Marriage Simple. 6 other books on relationships. Imago Relationship Therapy has been featured on Oprah Winfrey many times. And it's won an award as the most socially redemptive award for daytime talk shows based on conversations with Harville. He's one of her favorite relationship guests. So it's my delight and honor to welcome Harville Hendrix, PhD, to Guys Radio. Welcome, Harville.
Thank you. I appreciate being invited, Robert. Look forward to the talk.
I could have gone on and on and on with your introduction. You have so many allocates, but I figured we got to do the show. So let's just get started. So,
Right. Okay.
So on one of your first dates in 1977, your wife, Helen, recounted that you told her you wanted to write a book about why couples fight. So
Yeah.
how did that initial spark in your early conversations lead to you to co-create Imago Relationship Therapy and eventually write the book I've got right here, Getting the Love You Want, A Guide for Couples?
Well, when we met, we met at a party neither one of us wanted to go to. She had a girlfriend who wanted her to come to a party of women to whom she was going to bring an ex-boyfriend so that he could meet 10 or 20 women to compensate for her having given up him. And he was my buddy who lived across the street from me here in Dallas, and he wanted me to go. I did not want to go because I had gotten tired of dating. I had been divorced for about 2 or 3 years, but just tired of dating. So he talked me into going, and I agreed to go if I could leave in 1 hour. And he said, well, he would be comfortable by that time, and that would be great. So I'm on my way out the door at the 59 minutes. I'm watching my watch because I want to leave. I don't want to be there. And Helen walks into the door and says, well, hello, Dr. Hendrix. And I said, well, hello. And she said, at that time, she was using her previous married name, but she had just divorced. And so she said, I'm Helen Kreiling. And I said, so, because I'm wanting to leave. So she says, well, I was in one of your classes. I've been getting my graduate degree in psychology at Southern Methodist University. And at the time I was teaching on the faculty there. And so I took one of your classes. It was an evening class. But I never met you, never talked to you because it was a big room and went into detail. It was a door they had 2 doors, and she always went in the back door, never into the door up near me. So I actually had never really seen her because the room, I think, had 60 students in it. And it's hard to remember 60 students. So we got into this conversation about, I was in the class, and I said, Kreiling. Why am I remembering Kreiling? And then I said, oh, you said Helen Kreiling? She said, yes. I said, well, you wrote the best paper in that class. That's what I remember because I always keep the best paper, and it's over in my file system at the office. And so tomorrow when I go to the office, I'm going to double check and see if it is. If it is, I'll call and let you know. What's your phone number? Blah, blah, blah. I had no intention of ever moving beyond letting her know that I did not remember her, but I remembered her paper because it was so smart. I only keep one paper, and that's the paper that teaches me something. All the other papers usually don't. They just regurgitate the class or the books or what I said. So we started, and we met, got into conversation, and we came up with in this conversation, I think we went for coffee or something. Um, and I said, so you're divorced, and how long have you been? And you're divorced, and how long have you been? And and I said, you know what? I've been puzzling about why I'm divorced. I've been divorced now 2.5 years, and you've been divorced about a year. And Helen is a one the was the daughter of H.L. Hunt, is the daughter of H.L. Hunt, and is a wealthy socialite in Dallas, and has a distinguished degree from, the university. I'm a professor on the faculty teaching relationship skills. My course was marriage and family therapy, and here I am divorced, having taught at the graduate level how to be married or how marriage works. So I said, well, why do you think we got into this? Why do couples fight? Well, what do you think? I mean, blah, 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 blah. So that went into a conversation, which led to why does anybody fight? Which led to, marital therapy as I've been teaching it has a 40% success rate, which is a failure, which means a failed system. So what I've been thinking about is developing a new uh, couples therapy and start doing research on the couples I'm seeing and get some other couples. So that's how we got started. That's how the research got started, and the focus was to answer the question, why do couples fight? That's a subcategory which would answer the question of why does anybody fight? Probably the same answer. And we came up with, after a long, long, I think one time I had 22 reasons why couples fight, which obviously is not going to work. But I did a factor analysis and it came down to one sentence. Couples fight because they object to difference. Very simple. You are not what I thought. And when I ask you something, you don't answer the way I want it answered. And you don't have the same taste. And that we ran into several of those. I didn't like the plays
Oh,
she wanted me to go to. She didn't like the restaurants I wanted to go to. So we got into understanding that. Yeah.
now, how does that work in relationships where no two people are the same? So the wife might like sushi and the guy likes
Yeah.
veal parmesan. How do you? I mean, that there's nothing wrong with a little bit of a difference there. So give me the context for that statement.
Well, so there are two ways to go with that. One is the human brain begins life in what is called a kind of symbiotic consciousness, which means it assumes that you are experiencing what I'm experiencing. And then when I check with you and you say, well, no, the lemonade tastes too sour for me. And I said, well, it was really just right or a little sweet for me, that's a difference. And that means that then something wrong with your tongue because you're not, I mean, the lemonade is a little sweet, not sour. So that's a part of we learn in the brain sciences. That's the givenness of human existence that I'm assuming until I begin to think about it. And not many people have thought about it since Socrates 3,000 years ago, is that the different inner worlds, that people have different inner worlds. So that's one thing. The second is when we're little, something tragic happens to us. And that is that the caretakers, no matter how good they are, rupture the symbiotic connection, the flow back and forth between the caretaker and the baby. The cuddling, the cooing, the pointing, look at that, mom, look at this, blah, blah, blah. And mom says, oh, look at that. And when that gets ruptured, the brain does something then even more tragic, which is it attaches anxiety to the to that experience that and then it retreats inside itself. And when it goes inside itself, it loses awareness of other selves and of the inner world of other selves because now it's preoccupied with its own survival. So it's a natural tendency of the mind to assume that you see things the way I do. But because we're all wounded in early infancy, it becomes a rigid commitment that the world is the way. In other words, I have access to objective reality. Now, so the thing about it is, as you just said, there's nothing wrong with difference. Well, there's nothing actually, as you push that, there's nothing other than difference in the universe. And I decided to check that out with quantum physics. And down at the smallest particle, smallest level, there are no two particles that are alike. They're very similar, which is what puts them into the relationship they have with each other. But no identity exists in the universe at any level, anywhere, with anything. So that consequently, to object to difference is to object to reality. So we're all a little crazy when we think that if you don't see things the way I see it, then you see it wrong. And that's the source of all conflict. It even leads not only to conflict in marriage and divorces, but it leads to war. Look at the wars going on
Sure.
right now. The war. It's all has to do with you are not me. You see things different from me. You're wrong. We have to do something about you.
Now, the Imago Relationship Therapy, how did that blossom out of this train of thinking?
Well, in talking with Helen, and I had a small practice going at the time while I was teaching. Had a the university gave me permission to use up some of my time to practice the discipline that I was teaching. So I started doing research, and I began to lecture around Dallas as I began to get some new ideas about how do people. The first question was, how in the world do people get together? I got interested in romantic love. What is the fallen in love phenomenon? And began to lecture on the insights I had about that. And the lectures and started doing a workshop with couples to talk about that. How did you wind up with Peter or Mary or whoever you're with? Because that was getting really interesting, how childhood influences partner selection. Hardly anybody believes that. Like, I married somebody similar to my caretaker, but everybody does if you fall in love, because there's something the brain is trying to do, which is to deal with the threat that happened in the rupture with the caretaker early in childhood. Trying to deal with that threat, the brain still needs that, has that need. So it looks for somebody unconsciously who is similar to the caretaker with whom it still expects that need to be satisfied. So when I fall in love, I'm going to assume this person is going to be interested in and give me what my caretaker didn't give. So I began to lecture. People began to come to my lectures um, at all different kinds of places and started asking me if they could come and talk to me about my theory. And I said, I don't really have a system. I just have some ideas. And they said, well, we don't care. We just want to know you're doing something and it's new. Can we come? So I set up a small training group. People came in every week for 2 hours, and I'd just talk about what I was learning. And that finally led to a whole group and finally led to, well, this is now looks like a system. And it took about 2 or 3 years to realize I had a book there, and that the first edition was of the book you just showed of Getting the Love You Want. The first edition had two-thirds of the theory in it, and then it came out twice more with as I found out more and more. So that the edition you have has the full dialogue process, and that's what I learned was that marital therapy at the time was what I now call parallel psychotherapy. That is, a therapist would put a couple in the room and work with each one of them individually, assuming that they would learn by seeing the other one work as if they were in psychotherapy. And that doesn't work. for couples. So with Helen and I, we we also were experimenting with what will work because Helen is very intense. I'm very intense, and we both believe we're right. And so we were having this huge argument one night, and went to her house and she said, "Come in, let's see if we can resolve this." And she walked in and she says, "So Harville, here's what I want to say: stop. Let's just stop." And one of us talk and one of us talk, but we take turns talking, not both talking at the same time. So that was the first sort of wedge. Okay, I'll still monologue and you monologue. We'll do parallel monologues. But it did calm me down. And being a clinician, I noticed that change in behavior shifted my affect. And I said, I'm going to do something with couples. So I had a couple I was seeing the next day. And so instead of them talking to me sitting in a room, them talking to me, I turned them to each other and said, I want you not to talk to me, but to talk to each other. And I sort of regulated how they would talk. And it was amazing how the energies, I realized I had just done something fundamentally different. Had not couples talking with the therapist to get therapy, talking with each other did something that talking with me didn't do. So I stayed with that, and it would be a long story just to tell. It took about 5 years for me to learn from couples what they needed and how they needed to say it to each other. And that ultimately led to the three-step dialogue process that is in that book. And that then became the engine of therapy,
Okay, and you call it Imago dialogue?
the Imago dialogue. Yeah.
Okay. So how does a session work then? Because it sounds like when you were there, maybe the couple sees you as a little bit as kind of the referee,
Yeah.
where when they're on their own, they might start yelling at each other or something or
Yeah.
blaming.
Oh, they will.
How do
And
you how did you work as the referee, and how did you guide people so when they're not with you, that they can continue to have a safe dialogue, if you will?
very important question, because in turning them this way, I found they would still run into each other. So I'd back them off and say, could you say that to Peter in a different way? Or could you say that to George in a different way? And I found they could not really say it differently. So I then began to make up what I now call sentence stems and would say, so use my sentence stem to say, um, I want to talk about our sex life. Is now a good time? And George or Mary would have to say, well, yes, we're in the therapy office. I guess it's now a good time. And I would say that just say yes or no, stop this verbalizing. And so I finally developed a series of sentence stems and I trained the couple. They didn't like it, it was rigid. But what I was aware was the structure prevented them from crossing each other's boundaries so that as against their will, they became safer with each other because the structure honored boundaries. So now when I talk and I say something frustrating, I have to say, well, Peter, if I got it, what you're frustrated about me is, and then describe what Peter said. Did I get it? And Peter has to say, well, now I've finally learned why so often, well, some of it, but not all of it. We've now learned that the ear has a 30% accuracy rate, or sorry, 60%, 70% distortion rate. So just naturally, you only get a quarter, quarter to a third what somebody says. So I learned to say, well, would you send it again? Slowed everything down and just walked them through it. And while they complained about how rigid and structured this is, they would come out at the end of an hour of having not collided with each other, of having finally said something and not been criticized for saying it by saying that was the first time we've ever had a conversation without fighting. So I'm picking up clues. Okay, there's something new here. So I keep working on a range of sentence stems, which I would eventually train people to use. So when they left my office, They didn't go away with an experience of having talked. They went away with a skill about
Mhm.
how to talk. And I came up one day with, um, what I've noticed is people will come to me and they want to talk about money or sex or children or schedules or whatever. They got a problem. They want to talk about it. And if they just talk about the problem, nothing happens. If they change the way they talk about the problem goes away because the problem is a function of how it's talked about. So they become safe with each other. Then they realize, well, planning our vacation is not that big a deal. And it's really helpful to plan it so that we came up with the word collaboration. So we collaborate instead of polarize around where we're going on a vacation or how often we're going to have sex or whatever the topic is. So when that got clear to me, and it takes me a long time to even believe what I'm seeing, it got clear to me that had to be permanent. How you talk is more important than what you say.
Okay. Okay. All right. My special guest on Guys Radio, Harville Hendrix, the iconic relationship expert, author of Getting the Love You Want, a guide for couples. We're talking about Imago Therapy. There's a couple of buzzwords in there, Harville, that you've been kind of talking about in terms of the sessions themselves, mirroring,
Yes,
validation, empathy, and also no negativity. Could you
yes.
break those down a little bit further for us?
Well, there's a the listening um, is not just sitting and hearing what's coming to your ear, but it became really important to help couples learn to mirror what they were hearing and to mirror it exactly. It learned over time that our brains does not want a kind of summary or a what you call a synthesis of what I said. The brain wants to know every word and to get it just right. So you have to mirror back accurately what your partner said. And then you have to do the second sentence stem is you have to do the accuracy check. Did I get you? And the accuracy check will always be wrong. So you have to say, well, will you send what I didn't get right again? And as I just said, we learned that that was often not so much a real intention to not hear something. The brain, the ear just doesn't have the capacity for accuracy. So sending it over and over again. So then what was important was the sentence stem called "Is there more?" Now, usually when somebody says something, you mirror it back, and did I get it? They'll think, well, it's my turn to talk. But if that happens, the conversation doesn't go anywhere because one person replaces another person. But if the receiver who's mirroring says, is there more about that? And says it with, interest and more, like real curiosity, person might, who's expecting now reaction to what they just said, is surprised and often say, well, no, well, actually, yeah, I do want to say some more about that. So you mirror until the person says, well, actually, I've said it all. I don't have any more to say about that. So then you summarize. And that's the next sentence. Well, then let me see if I've got all of that. So then once you summarize, then you go to the big one. Mirroring is one thing, and that's also mirroring. You go to the big one, which is I finally labeled it validation, that the receiver has to say to the sender, I get it. I see how you see it that way. I can have to do that knowing I'm not agreeing with you. I'm not giving me up, but I'm now stopping erasing you by telling you you're wrong. I'm telling you that I see how you think about it that way, and that how you think about it that way is valid, that that's your truth. And I leave it alone. And then I say, and given how you experience that, I can imagine you might feel glad, an emotion, glad, sad, mad, or scared, which is empathy. So you go through mirroring, validating, and empathy. And that structure is a rigid structure that we use to train the couple, that not that they have to have every conversation using those three things, but they have to have them available as
Okay.
a skill.
Now, you mentioned, Harville, no negativity. And
Yes.
a lot of times when couples have disagreements, obviously it's based on there's some type of negative emotion there. And it could be coming from either side, or one side could spark negativity in the other side. I guess my question is, talk to us a little bit about negativity and how that's managed. And also from a broader perspective, when people go off on their own and before they start, often they'll start yelling at each other, or however they argue, what are the guardrails they can put in place, slide them right in so they can tamper down the emotions that can drive a lot of these conversations?
Okay, so that let me respond to the second thing first,
Okay.
which is when people go off and they become unhinged, or the partner says you're acting crazy or whatever,
Name calling, whatever, right?
name calling. What we train couples to do is to understand that there's an important to have a concept behind some interactions. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense. So what you need to understand is that when your partner goes off into one of those tangents, something you did or said, unintentionally, probably, maybe intentionally, or you didn't know it,
Mhm.
triggered a memory in your partner's amygdala, where the house of where
Mhm.
the house of memory triggered a memory from childhood. So they are responding to you as if you and they are in your partner's past. So if that partner's trigger triggers you, and then you start doing it to them, you got triggered in your childhood.
Mhm.
Most couples' arguments are not about the present, they are about the reenacting the past in the present with a different topic. So, what are you going to do with that? Well, so this is a skill, difficult to get down, and people had to train to do it. That when your partner says, where is the goddamn thing, and you didn't close the garage door,
Right.
that instead of saying, don't yell at me and blah 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 blah, that you say, hey Peter, let me see if I'm getting you to go into mirroring. You're wondering why I didn't close the garage door. Am I getting that? You have to grit your teeth and train your brain, but you have the concept, my partner's just gone to childhood. If I go with him, I will go to my childhood. Then we'll have two children. But if I mirror him, he will move from the amygdala into his prefrontal cortex. Now he can think. Back here, he's not thinking, he's just reacting. Now he can think, because if I say, did I get that? What you
Yeah.
just said, he has to go to the prefrontal cortex to say, well, yeah. So then I say, is there more about that? So you see, if I have that skill, I can now keep my partner in their prefrontal cortex because I've asked you, is there more about that?
Mhm.
They have to now stop and think. Well, if they stop to think, they're up here. They're not in the reactive mode,
Mhm.
it's back in lower of the lower part of their
Makes
brain.
makes perfect sense. You need a little bit of discipline, but I guess practice makes perfect there. Now, the other part of the question was, and forgive me for throwing two at you, was the negativity. One of the things you
Negativity.
mentioned is like keep
Yeah.
negativity has no place in this type of dialogue.
Well, and negativity actually has no place in the human existence. All negativity is toxic. Um, but negativity can be understood. I'm negative because I'm threatened.
Mhm.
So negativity is a defense against my own vulnerability. So we can understand that your negativity makes sense, but it's dysfunctional. So a short answer to a long piece of research and a long theory is people come to me and they want a close, loving, and warm relationship. And so I began to get clear that they could not have that, nor could I have it with Helen if I was negative. You can't be intimate and close and negative. So if you want what you come and paid me to help you get, you have to make a sacrifice. And the sacrifice is you have to surrender negativity. But understand that your negativity, your negation has a wish in it. All negativity. You didn't do it right. You didn't do this. I want to do that. Has a wish in it. So, and the wish is legitimate and the wish has to be responded to. So that you know that around this hall of negativity, there's this precious wish. And you, instead of going with a complaint, go and look and say, well, what I want that's triggering my reaction. What do I want? Well, I would like for the garage door to always be closed, when Peter comes home from work, to close the garage, or whatever it is, to, make love to me twice a week. I have a wish, so that you drop the sharing the frustration and you share the wish. I will say to Helen when I'm into that is Helen. In fact, I just did it with her yesterday. So Helen, may I make a request? And so instead of telling her you were late coming to dinner again, I say to her, and my request is that we have set a time when we're going to meet for dinner, and we agree on the time, and then that we both then make every effort we can to always be there on time. And if we can't, we'll send a text or a phone call.
That's fantastic because it takes the blame out of it. And a lot of times in relationships, one person is more of a blamer and the other
Yeah.
person's on the receiving end.
Right.
As part of that, Harville, do you find that when you've dealt with couples for so many years, is there a difference in how men and women respond to the Imago therapy in general? Because a lot of guys, they don't want to have the talk with their partners. A lot of them are emotionally kind of shielded. I'm not going to say shut down, even though some of them are, but women seem to be a little bit more open about the emotions, and it kind of scares guys sometimes to get into that space.
Yeah. Well, so what happens is that the male fear of being vulnerable gets dealt with by the fact that the man knows that when he says something, his partner, his wife, is going to say, well, Peter, let me see if I'm getting that, instead of
Hmm.
being judgmental. So if I know I can talk without, because the shutdown
Hmm.
has to do with the history of being
Right.
shut down. So, but if Mary starts mirroring me when I say something, even if it's not emotional, I might just say, I liked today, I liked the ball game. And Mary says, so you like the ball game? Is there more about the ball game? Uh, what is this? Well, no, no. Well, yeah, the ball game is nice to have Sunday afternoon off. So he liked having Sunday afternoon off and watching the ball game. The guy will begin to move out. And
Hmm.
what Mary also learns is that she has to regulate how many words she uses. But if Peter will show up and mirror her within her first two or three sentences, so hold on, let me see if I'm getting that. Mary will then will regulate, because Mary is expressing herself, which is her defense, and it's a typical defense. With one part of the brain just has to escalate, and so she's adapted to that. If Peter will show up and say, well, Mary, blah, 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 am I getting that? Mary will not need to try to get his attention anymore
Hmm.
because he's giving the attention. So Peter activates the more recessive side of the brain defenses. Mary has been being defended by escalation. Mary's escalation is contained. If Peter mirrors,
Got
Peter's
it.
resistance will show up. The resistance to sharing will change if Mary will mirror. So the magic is in the mirroring and the quickness of the mirror when the partner starts talking. That I've just seen that just transforms.
Okay. Now, I guess, Harville, that you have to be careful not to be sound patronizing because if you
Oh,
say,
okay.
"Oh, you're enjoying the game," yes, dear, I'm enjoying the game. Why do you enjoy the game? Well, it's Sunday afternoon. I'm enjoying the game. Did I hear you right? You're enjoying the game. They'll be like, "Get me a beer or go away." How do you avoid that?
You bring up one of the dangers of it all, is that it's hard to have integrity and to be authentic in our
Right.
interactions. But and so that I do have to say, because it does happen, is
Mhm.
that when you do it, you have to have
Gotcha.
authenticity. That
Got it.
you because it is because the brain knows when you're lying.
They don't BS, right?
Yes. So what we finally arrived at was, and Helen and I made this decision, transformed our relationship because we've been on our way to the divorce court twice, and both of them was because of negativity. So we finally decided. First time it didn't work because we tried to weed it out. And the second time we said zero negativity. There, if I can't not be negative, I'm just not going to interact. That's not going to work. So what I have to do is realize, as I said earlier, every negative statement has an embedded wish. Pay attention to the wish in the frustration that led to the negativity. Ask for what you want instead of complaining about what you don't have. So it's very simple, but it requires us retraining the brain
Got
because
it.
the brain's just trying to survive.
Mhm.
And but it puts itself in danger by using those defenses.
Got it.
So you really get, and after a while, your brain gets it that when you regulate and are positive and affirming, that you really are safe. So then that behavior becomes your defense,
Perfect.
and protects you from making your own situation dangerous.
Okay. My conversation is with Harville Hendrix, PhD, Getting the Love You Want, a guide for couples. Wow, I'm really enjoying this conversation. We have time for one more subject, and that's
Okay.
about singles because there's a lot of single folks out there. And you say something very interesting, and that is that people kind of fall in love with or choose their partners based on something from their past that was missing. For instance, my wife and I spoke about this yesterday, and she said, what did you see in me, and vice versa. So I said, well, my mom, God bless her and God rest her soul, she didn't really get me. She loved me and she was my mother, but you get me more than my mother does. And I said, how about you? And she said, well, I was not really heard by my family because I had an older sister, she was the elder sister, I had a brother and he was the guy, and my parents, she's Korean, they didn't really listen to what I had to say. So you have a good role in that, and that you listen to me. So that we both filled a need for each other there, and we didn't even realize it until I read your book.
Well, and what you feel the need is, all human beings have this non-negotiable need to be seen, heard, and valued. And so, what we've discovered is that if in adulthood you, as you were just describing, get that, and you keep asking yourself, I keep asking, is Helen feeling seen, heard, and valued by me?
Mhm.
When she is, I'm now addressing that missing thing in her childhood without ever focusing on the missing thing in her childhood. Because her brain has to have this certainty that she's feeling seen, heard, and valued, because that's what was lost in childhood. So when people just make it, and guess what? Dialogue is the most powerful way of seeing, hearing, and valuing that you can imagine. Because if I'm saying to you, is now a good time to talk? And let me see, did I get you? Was this accurate? Is there more about that? And gosh, that makes sense. And I can imagine how you must have felt. Boy, are you seen and
Mhm.
heard and valued. And now your defenses are unnecessary. You can drop them and move into engagement and
Okay.
connection.
Okay. Last question. And as a follow-up on that notion, my wife said this to me yesterday when we were talking about this. She said, well, what happens when you realize that this is the role this person's playing? They're filling in this need that I had from a kid and I wasn't fulfilled, and vice versa. Can you come to a point where, oh, I see how you fill that need. Thank you. Goodbye. I'm going to go with somebody else now. Can the love end because of that, with that recognition?
No, that just means you weren't actually, there was something inauthentic in the transaction,
Mhm.
because no one wants to leave the space of the fulfillment of desire. When that is really fulfilled, you bond and you're partners, and leaving is not considered. So many people say that, thank you, I appreciate that. But I'm
Goodbye.
before the affair occurs, And you wonder, why did this affair occur in a very good, loving marriage? No, it wasn't a good, loving marriage if there was an affair. You were not seen, heard, and valued. So your brain had to go somewhere else and get that because it's connected to survival and you can't live without it. So if you don't get it at home, you're going to get it somewhere else, or you will do things like drink alcohol, take drugs, overwork, spend too much time at work with other people, blah, 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 because it's not happening in the core place. So people who finally arrive at the point that they are present to each other, and I like to use that word, really present to each other, you're not going to leave that because the brain says, I'm safe here, and this feels good and it's fun. So
Fantastic.
zero negativity, zero negativity. You can't be close and negative. Not possible, not even logical. Zero negativity. And then you open the space for affirmation. And so that's the thing we teach people to do is instead of negating, what about affirming? And so, and sometimes I find myself when I'm a little frustrated with Helen, I would deliberately go and give her a compliment. And then what I was frustrated about becomes irrelevant. And it's like, that's interesting. I don't care now about what she did. I just gave her a compliment. And you know what we found out happens with that? And it, brain research focus it. When I give her that, I get it. Any compliment I give to Helen goes to her, comes from the prefrontal cortex, but my amygdala also hears it. And since it's self-oriented only, it assumes the compliment was for me, that I'm complimenting me. So when I compliment you, part of me thinks I'm complimenting me, so I get what I give.
Hey, whatever works. I love it. Harville Hendrix, PhD, Getting the Love You Want, a guide for couples. I had about 20 more questions to ask you just about this book, and this
Oh,
time has just flown by. So I hope you'll come back. We can talk about this book and some of your other books, and just an absolute delight and so much wisdom there. So thank you being on Guys Radio. Please tell everybody where they can learn more about your work and your work with
oh,
Helen.
okay. Yes, Helen and I have a joint website called Harville and Helen, one word.com. There's is our schedule and access to all of the things that we do. And it also will help you get into how we use dialogue, not only with couples, but how we use it with everybody, anywhere, in any situation.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for being on Guys Radio, and I hope we can do it again.
Okay, be glad to. This was fun. Thank you.
If you enjoy the guests and content I bring you each and every week to Guys TV and Guys Radio, please support us by subscribing to our channels and platforms. Thank you.